my name is Jorge Crecis, and almost a year ago, I created an online training program called TWV. So far, the journey has been amazing, and now we are an online community with people from more than 16 different countries. Through the program, people get a consistent training for more than 12 months, which is an incredible asset in this crazy life of the artist. It's a fast-growing international community where people support each other, create networks and connections. We help people to intensify the stage presence, becoming more confident, more playful, and definitely enjoying more their careers. And we provide tools of self-care. As the training continues to grow, this podcast is the latest addition to our program. We provide more resources for our participants. And here I speak with people I greatly admire. And during our conversations, the participants of the training are invited to ask questions live and to take part of the conversation. We are about to open the 4th edition in a few weeks, so make sure you don't miss the early bird deadline. To get the latest updates about the TWV program or the podcast, make sure you subscribe to this podcast or to our newsletter. It is my great pleasure to introduce you the second guest on the TWV conversation with, this time, Ben Duke. This was a very intense and profound conversation where initially I made a very difficult first question to Ben. We talk about what makes a performer an incredible one and how Ben spots them. What are the barriers between the UK and Europe? How to keep your energy and the quality of your work by saying no to projects that doesn't serve your strategic or artistic vision, and how to manage the financial uncertainty that comes with saying no. How the quicker we define ourselves, the easier it is for the world to understand us and to provide the opportunities that we need. Without any further delay, here you have the second episode of Towards Vivencia in Conversation With. Here we are. Ben, thank you so much for having me today in your beautiful place and for agreeing to be part of our Towards Vivencia in Conversation With podcast.
You're welcome.
It's fantastic to be here back after many years, and you and I, we know each other for a bit. Yeah, I remember I was coming on the train journey, and I was remember that probably the first time that we have a connection was 2011 with our both pieces were at the same time on a stage, and I had to look at the title because I didn't remember the title. Up the down escalator.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I was going to introduce you. It's like, is this guy who is an amazing choreographer, amazing director, who won the National Critic Award in 2016, who was nominated for the Olivier Award last year for Goat, for Rambert. But the most important thing about him is like he made pieces that created moments that you remember forever. And I was remembering that I remember this line of the guy looking at the love of his life at the top of the escalator, of the longest escalator in London, who is in Angel.
Yeah.
And when I look at the title, it's like, oh, how cool it is. Out the long escalator. I don't remember the title, but I remember those moments. So that's my introduction of Ben. He's someone who is incredibly talented at creating those kind of moments. But something that took my attention over the last few days is I was really excited about coming and interviewing you, talk to you. And I was telling people, I'm going to talk to Ben Duke this week. And everyone was very jealous. It's like, he's amazing. You really like him. He's someone very, very talented, but very approachable, very likable. And everyone was saying that in a very genuine way, which in the dance world, in the world, is like you hear very mixed reviews about people, but with you it was very, very consistent. So I'm not going to ask you what makes you likable, but I'm going to ask you if you have other people in your life that you feel that they are very likable, that they were making a big impression in you, and why is that? Why do you think is that?
Wow. Yeah. Well, we should have my family in here to kind of counteract that opinion, or to maybe offer something else. I don't know about the idea of being likable. I suppose it's not something that I consider, but I do. I'm definitely have a lot of time for people who are are kind, and I think that that's something probably my dad has somehow instilled in me as a way of being in the world. He was never impressed by people who were kind of boastful or who were kind of full of themselves. And as I get older, I realize that there's something about that I've internalized, or I'm trying to think now about people who I think of in that way. I think definitely in the kind of, I mean, certainly in the dance world, that idea of kind of a way of working which involved negativity and criticism and kind of hierarchical relationship, all of that stuff I felt existed, but was something that was never particularly interesting to me. It never helped me. I think some people maybe responded to that kind of way of working. I was like, I don't know. Maybe also I feel like there's something, and this is not me trying to be likable. This is me almost feeling like there's a kind of there's an interest in other people and in how you can extract, if that makes it sound a bit selfish, but maybe it is selfish, how you can kind of get things out of people. And that's always been interesting to me, and it's always been about what they have. And so there's a kind of atmosphere of, for me, it has to be an atmosphere of ease. Like, it has to be easy. It can't be fearful, and it can't be right and wrong. It can't be like, you've got to impress me. So there's something around that feeling which I think is in me somehow. A bit stumped by that question.
I like to start with difficult questions.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
But it was very genuine. I was very surprised of the consistency of how people regard to Benduke, and it was very, very interesting. And you were talking about how to extract from people, and how that way of being so disciplined in the studio to the point of being not bossy but nasty as well. Sometimes it works for other people, and it's not your way. And in the same way, I would like to ask you about these likable people. It's like, you're working at the moment with someone who is incredible. I fell in love with her artistically the first time that I saw her in the Scottish Dance Theatre, Solène. So I would like to ask you what it takes your attention from those performers before you know them personally. Let's try to clarify the question. What it makes a performer something that you watch on a stage and you say, you're an incredible performer? And how, the second question is like, how you nurture that in workshops or directing them?
Yeah. I think, I mean, I also, I met Solène when I went to work with Scottish Dance Theatre, and as usual, I begin the process with improvisations and tasks and things like this. And I like things to kind of run on for quite a long time. So that place where people slightly lose track of what they're supposed to be doing, or they get a bit bored, or I like going into this place, and also sometimes for me going, I'm a bit bored now, or letting myself kind of relax into that place. And in that place, I just notice who I watch, or where my eyes go, and what it is. I don't even know what it is about that, but I think that Solène is definitely, she's very watchable. And I mean, maybe we'll talk more about that, because that's another slightly vague kind of phrase, but there's something that I trust about that. And I think it's probably something that we all have, but it turns out that I like Solène. Like, I see her in the studio environment, and I think she's great, and then later it turns out that I like her. And normally it's that way. It's odd if I think they're amazing, and then I talk to them afterwards and I'm like, wow. So it's probably just the same thing that we have with everyone in how we relate to people. There's a chemistry, or there's a relationship, or there's something about someone which makes you think, I could be a friend with you, or that there's something interesting about them to you. So it felt like that, and also she was funny. So the thing about people who make me laugh is another thing that draws me towards people. So yeah, with Selene it was like that. In terms of nurturing it, I think that I feel certainly this last process we've been through, it's been a lot about space, and the reason I asked Selene is because I knew that she could sit in this space with me, and the space is often quite unstructured and quite what are we doing, and we sit in that little room over there and we stare out the window, and Selene maybe does her emails while she's waiting for something to happen, and then suddenly we have a thought and we try something, and then we sit back into inactivity. And it was important that someone could be in that space and trust its indirectness. And I think because I'd worked with Selene on 3 projects before, and I knew her well enough, so it didn't feel so much like I was nurturing her, but I was trusting her, and I was setting up an environment in which hopefully she could kind of offer, well, she did offer, of herself very generously and kind of consistently. So yeah, the nurturing feels a bit like neglect. Like the idea of kind of creating space. And I think I love that feeling of space, and I know for some people they don't, and so I think there's performers who I think are amazing, but I think we wouldn't work so well together because that space would be frustrating for them.
I was fascinated by the idea of like, you watch them, you get a bit bored to that, you get comfortable in that place, and then you reckon where your eyes goes. Is that a conscious process, or is just because it's happening now in the conversation? It's something that you've been developing over the time as a director? Is like you train yourself to realize, okay, in that moment I am watching at this person.
It's something I've thought about. I don't know if it's something that I suppose it's something I've thought of. I remember reading this thing, or one of the first pieces that I saw and loved was this Alan Platel show.
In 1897?
Possibly.
The one that it says in your bio?
Oh yeah, that one. Well, no, actually that one I saw before. That was the Bernadette show, which was on the Dodgem track, which is amazing. And then, I don't know, maybe 2 years later I saw a piece called Eat Bark, which she did, which was, C.D. Larby was dancing in it, and he was amazing. And the show was chaos, or it felt like chaos. And there's people singing, and then there's someone catching like cannonballs on their stomach, and there's someone. The thing was like, what? And I had this feeling of like, well, this is chaos, but I'm enjoying the fact that I have a freedom to kind of look here or to watch there. And then at the end, when I spoke to people, and I thought everyone's experience of that was going to be really different, but actually everyone had seen the same things. So there was something about stuff is happening, but he had cleverly, or somehow he'd understood that our eyes will go to certain places. So in a way, we didn't miss stuff. We'd somehow taken it all in, and I love that idea, because it's not like a film where we don't have so much choice of where we're looking. I felt like I had so much choice and so much freedom to piece this show together, but lots of us had done the same piecing together. So I felt freedom, but actually afterwards I was like, it's more controlled and more crafted than I thought. And that was interesting to me, and I was interested in why we had looked at the same things, or why we had gone out. So I had that feeling of what is that about? And in improvisations, the thing of I'm not entirely sure why, but I try and trust that instinct. And sometimes that does turn into a theory about it, very obvious things, like you have a room full of people and one person stands still and then you watch them, or you have a room stage full of everyone interacting and someone stops and turns to the audience.
So I would like to pick up on something that we've said over the last few minutes about being watchable and that takes your attention. Are you trying consciously to do that through your directing, either when you are on a stage or when you're not, or it's something that you are just working and see what happens and where the audience direct their attention?
I feel like I'm interested in controlling that. Yeah, but the last two Lost Dog pieces. One's a solo, and this one is a duet, and there's not loads of choice. Then it's so few people. The piece I did with Romeo, there were more people, and I became more aware then of where people might look. So I think with that process, there was a more conscious kind of thinking around that. There's no like magic tricks about it, but it's just noticing in kind of rehearsal or as you watch things, like where does my eye go and what do I miss, and do I want to miss that, and do I want to kind of see that. And I think for me that's a lot to do with kind of boredom, or trying to be honest about boredom, and trying to be honest about how long I'm interested in something, or how long something will hold my attention, and how one of the things that came up often in the Romeo rehearsal was this idea of like kind of doing nothing and people doing nothing, and there's different ways of doing nothing, and one can really pull focus, and one can allow people to temporarily kind of disappear, and which one do we want? Sometimes you want a mixture of those things, and trying to work out what that is that allows people to be seen or not seen. That stuff is really interesting for me, definitely. But it's often in the kind of the area where there's... Actually, I'm not sure that's true. I was going to say it's often in an area where there's not much activity, but actually people can be very active and also not seen. They can be not seen. But maybe that's slightly different to what we're talking about.
Yeah, but I think direct my next what I was going to follow this conversation is like, okay, could you be more concrete in that ideas, because you have, I couldn't take my eyes off you in Paradise Lost, but you were on a stage, and there was nothing more than you, a chair, and very little more. So it was kind of like my attention was there because it was what it was happening. I'm really looking forward to see Juliet and Romeo in a few weeks, in a couple of weeks. So when you're creating with other groups, when you're outside, how do you direct how is the things of not doing anything that makes people more visible, or not doing anything that makes them disappear, or move them a lot to make them disappear? Can you be more? Could you recall any of those moments that you make that choice as a director?
Yeah, one of the things that we ended up talking about quite a lot in the Romeo project was was around this idea of doing nothing. And I realized that I was, in my own practice, kind of doing nothing on stage was kind of an activity. And I found it really hard to communicate what that was to a group of people who, if I can generalize, and this isn't true of all of them, but if I was to generalize about that particular situation, a lot of them hadn't spent that much time doing nothing on stage. Like most of them, when they were on stage, they were doing usually really complicated choreography. They were doing things. So the kind of inactivity thing was not so much part of their thing. And I was asking them, quite a lot of them, for quite a lot of time, to do nothing. And what I felt we discovered a bit in that was that the doing nothing, if the doing nothing is literally like you kind of tune out, or you think about you're shopping or something, then I'm watching you and I'm like, I know that you're thinking about your shopping. I don't know how I know that, but I know that you are. And so it turns out that the doing nothing somehow had to keep it was almost like a kind of bubble around the work. It had to keep our focus in. So their doing nothing had to involve their attention. They had to stay interested in what was happening on stage. Otherwise, we would go to them and be like, oh, I'm not interested. I would follow your interest as it floats away from this piece, or lack of interest. So it felt like there was something about that which had to hold us as audience. Like if you're watching on stage, you are in a way somehow guiding the audience. And I found that really interesting, and it made me think about the kind of solo piece like Paradise Lost, that actually it's almost that's what's tiring about that kind of process, or performing that show, is that you have to stay interested in what you're doing. And if I'm not interested, then the audience will know, like as if by magic, they'll know that straight away. And maybe those things are all just, we know that situation socially, like if you feel like someone is suddenly looking past you or whatever, like we can read it. But I think it's interesting that we can also read it over big distances, like onto the stage. So that was one of the things we said we have to, and it made sense to me of all this stuff, which when I was training at drama school, I would find really annoying, this kind of character backstory stuff. You'd spend all this time, you'd be like, who cares, just come on stage and do it. But in this piece, where I was like, okay, these people don't have much to do, we have to talk a bit about this, about how this situation might make you feel, or what it could be like, so that it can hold it, so that doing nothing holds it. And it's not that I need to be looking at you and go, wow, they're so fascinating, look at their kind of nothing acting. If you do that too much, that's also not right. But I need you to kind of hold it. So that was a strange kind of thing about, you want them to be not pulling focus, but also not letting the bubble of the piece burst somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, and you said a few times, holding us, and this is something that in Spanish we don't have. It's a holding the space.
Right.
It's such a beautiful concept that it's very difficult to explain. No?
Yeah.
I mean, towards vivencia, in the way that we explain or we training is by training playfulness. What does it mean, and how you be playful, even if you are doing nothing.
Yeah.
How you are in unitask, not multitasking, but in the task in whatever you're doing. And then how important is the commitment, that if you don't perform, no one else can perform for you. You became the doer, no? Something coming from Grotowski.
Right.
And you were talking about the background stories, probably from Stanislavski and things like that, from acting school. Do you have tools or tips to tell the people who are listening to us, or the performers that you were working with, for not thinking about the grocery shop and being there holding the space?
Yeah. I think it's quite simple, but I think it's a practice, and I think that the practice is about the engagement of the imagination. And I didn't know this when I first started training in dance, but certainly a lot of the dance training that I went through, I realized that wasn't being spoken about. There were moments of like visualization and things like this, but I was like, we are not really being asked to engage our imagination. And that means that it's really difficult to engage your imagination when you need to. Maybe it is a skill. It's something that we all have as children, obviously, and we're all very good at it. And then at a certain point, we do it less and less, and we lose that thing. And I feel like it's something that needs to be practiced, because then you can enjoy the imaginative world. And it's a game. I mean, you're talking about playfulness, so it's like we're setting up a situation where I'm saying, okay, this person here is going to be chosen to be sacrificed. So we're following the kind of rite of spring thing. This is the Romeo piece. What would it be like to be watching that? To imagine that someone is going to be sacrificed. And we all know that this is a fake and ridiculous situation, but your imagination can do that thing of accepting it's ridiculous and fake, but I still need to imagine what this is like. I love to disappear into those imaginative places and to play that particular game. And I think that those people on stage also needed to enter into that imaginative game. So in terms of a skill, I think it's something like that, which is, I think, what a lot of acting exercises ask us to do, but a lot of dance training ignores.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's very trainable.
Yeah.
Why we created this training.
Yeah.
And I don't call it any other thing, but it's a training program. And it's something that you need to train, definitely.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. Acting is something that they've been researching and writing about it and trying to put their fingers on it. And it's very, very rational. It's very mental. It's very. But how do you engage that imagination, that thing with your body, when there is sometimes in dance, by definition and by nature, many times it's abstract. There is not that storytelling that, yes, you can create your imaginary within that piece, but sometimes it's not given to you from the director. So it's definitely a skill. And I was going to jump into something different, but you said something very, very nice and very beautiful that I would like to pick a bit on something. And one of my favorite books ever is The Invisible Actor by Yoshio Ida. I have it in front of my bed. I look at it, and I have 4 or 5 copies in my place because I give it to people. It's one of those things. So you said, I love to disappear on those imaginative places. Can you tell me, what do you mean more about I like to disappear?
My first experience of acting and kind of being on stage was a bit like a disappearance or a kind of escape. It felt like an escape for me from who I was and the kind of limits of my own kind of personality and situation. And so there was something about an escape. I think that's one of the things I love about the stage, is that you've got this really conflicting thing of trying to go in but not disappear. So I want to disappear myself, but I don't want to disappear from the audience, because that's, again, something which we've all seen on stage and is not so interesting. I don't think it's so interesting.
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because Josie talks about being the invisible. It's like the person becomes invisible to make the character visible. You talk about disappearing. I like to talk about it as active surrendering. You kind of like surrender your ego, yourself, your identity for something else to exist to you. So it's something that we all talk in different ways.
Yes.
And it's one of the magic moments as performer. When that happens, it's like, okay, I've done my job. You just mentioned that in your acting school, you were at Guildford, if I'm right. Then you did dance at the London Contemporary Dance School.
Yeah.
And then you have a degree in literature, right?
Yes.
So you have 3 degrees.
Kind of.
Kind of, I like that.
Yeah. The drama school was a year course, so it was a postgraduate something. A 1-year course.
How much that has to do with curiosity and research and getting to know more? How much that has to do, and I'm speaking from a personal point of view, with imposter syndrome? I never know enough. And then in your bio you said that your whole career is trying to reconcile those 3 things together. So how much is curiosity research? How much has to do with imposter syndrome? I need to know more. And how you're trying to reconcile those 3 things.
Yeah, I guess a mixture, isn't it? I think that, like everything, I make sense of it later in my life. I think at the time I was just following a thing that was to do with circumstance, that was to do with curiosity, that was also to do with a slightly kind of short-term view. I was interested in performing and acting, but was kind of persuaded that it was good to do a more academic subject as a degree, and I loved that degree as well. So there was something about that which was appealing to me. The acting was still one of the kind of most important things to me while at university. So I thought, okay, I'll go into this. And then while I was studying acting, I was feeling like, this isn't quite the thing. It was almost like a sense of looking for the thing and feeling like it's almost here, but it's not quite. And then arriving in dance and feeling like, this is the thing. As I go through it, I reject. So I reject the cerebral world of English literature, and I go into acting, and then I reject the world of voice, and I go into dance. And then at the end of that, I'm like, actually, no, it's somehow all of these things kind of fused together. But definitely that I recognize that feeling of wanting to become an expert and wanting to know more. And yeah, there was a definite point where I kind of felt like, actually, this is enough. I have to get on now.
So it's fantastic that you felt that at some point it was enough.
I did. Yeah, I think I recognized that I probably wasn't going to become the dancer that I thought I could become when I started. So there was a kind of letting go of that idea. I remember doing a workshop with Chris Herring. We were setting up lots of very long improvisations full of confusion. He loved everyone to be confused, and everyone was confused, and the boundary between reality and play was very confusing, and no one really knew what was. People kept stopping the improvisation and not knowing whether we had stopped or whether we were carrying on, or whether the conversation we were having was outside the improvisation, and all of this stuff, which was amazing. But he said, what are you here for? And are you here to learn more skills? Are you here to get better at being yourself? And I thought, that's a good idea, isn't it? Because also then you can that can be an ongoing practice, but it doesn't involve, me learning how to break dance, or me learning it doesn't involve that. It involves this thing of me going, okay, let's just get on with that. And I remember that phrase really clearly, because I was like, oh yeah, I'm not here to learn any more skills. I've got to stop trying to learn more skills and get on with this other thing, which is, working out who you are.
What a magical moment!
Yeah,
it's like that's enough. Let's concentrate in
in
what it makes me special, because we are all, and I know it's a cop out and a cliche that we are all special, but actually we are unique. I don't know if you're special, but unique for sure. Your thoughts are not my thoughts, and we can philosophize about what the self is, but when this is how we started the project. It's like, what are the skills that you have for making who you are, and it's so important.
Yeah.
So what are your skills?
I don't know. I think that, I think it was about drawing these things together. And the process of doing Paradise Lost was kind of that in a way. I think that was the moment where I tried very consciously to be honest about who I was, and to try and bring these things together. So it felt like the skill was a movement between these places, and this was my history and my kind of makeup, and it felt very freeing to kind of admit that and to say, this is a book that I studied, a poem that I studied, and this is my voice, and this is my sense of humor, and this is how I move, and to try and just put all that in the thing. So it felt almost like not an anti-skill, but it felt like a loosening of my grip on the skill that I wanted. So certainly with the dancing, I imagined Paradise Lost was going to have a lot more dancing. And there's a bit in Paradise Lost where I talk about a solo that I imagined, but I don't do it because, and that was true, that was the process. I kept wanting to make this amazing solo, and I kept trying, and each time it kind of collapsed on itself. So I was like, okay, instead of holding on to this, if I loosen my grip on this and I just tell the audience that this is what was going to happen here, but I'm just going to tell you about it because there's actually nothing. there's a few little fragments, so there's really nothing here. And yeah, that was very joyful and yeah. So it felt weirdly like it was. I mean, it was hard work. The process was hard work, but it felt like there was something in that process that was like, okay, yeah, a kind of relaxing somehow. It doesn't feel like a skill, but yeah, it's a process. Yeah.
Or a state.
A state.
A state.
Yeah.
I mean, the state of I lose grip of it.
Yeah.
Which I like to explain it is like I made peace with myself. I had this big enemy for years, like you're not enough, you're not doing it. And there's the moment that you made peace with that, you lose grip, and it's fantastic. And I like to hear you because it's from this part is very reassuring. So thank you for that, because you described this solo, which I remember in this moment it was a big jump. I think you said at some point.
Yeah.
These kind of processes make us a tiny bit more friends of ourselves, and this is how I see it. So it's really, really nice. I'm very happy to hear that Paradise Lost was that for you.
Yeah, definitely.
If that was Paradise Lost, what is Juliet and Romeo? Yeah,
I had this breakthrough. It felt like a breakthrough in Paradise Lost. Like, yes, I know now how to do this. And we all know those things. They're like kind of false dawns, aren't they? Because then I was like, okay, so we're going to do something similar, different theme. And then, of course, I started Juliet and Romeo. And I was like, this is totally different and so difficult. And very simply the fact that I wasn't... I needed to have a relationship with someone on stage. So my relationship in Paradise Lost was just between me and the audience, and I worked out some things about that and how that worked and how I could play with that. Paradise Lost, I am talking about stuff which is autobiographical and private, and I'm sharing it here. So there's this thing for me of like, what am I doing? Why as a performer am I happy to share with a whole lot of strangers? And now in this piece, I'm trying to deal with how do you share a relationship? Like how do you do that? So it was really like, twisting my head around, and it was very difficult. And then again, there was a point where I was like, okay, I have to let go of that piece that I thought it was going to be and work out what this piece is. And well, you'll see when you see the piece, it's like it's a relationship where we've set up this kind of very obvious connection with the audience of saying, okay, we need you to witness our relationship and to kind of help us with our relationship by watching it. So yeah, it was I don't know, as usual, that thing, something's successful and feels like it's giving you a new way of working, and then you try and apply that to the next piece, and suddenly you're like, oh, we're back to the beginning again. I don't really know anything. So yeah, I don't know what it is. It's a progression, but it's also like, somewhere it's not, it doesn't go like this, it's like somewhere else. But yeah, somehow you trust that the information is helping, like the process you've been through is helping.
How is it growing while it's being performed?
Yeah, the ending of the show has shifted a lot. This was like us wandering through, going, we could end here, or do we need another 5 minutes? Where do we end this piece? Because it's like a kind of, walking into the darkness.
Have you nailed it? The end?
I don't know. We'll have to talk about it after you've seen it.
Okay. I think it's well, I spoiled.
It's ongoing. It's ongoing, but I feel happier with it.
I can't wait to see it. I'm bringing friends actually, so it's gonna be at the place.
At the place, yeah.
The week of the 17th of
so June.
It's gonna be 18, 19.
Yeah, it's Tuesday to Saturday. So
Tuesday to Saturday.
Yeah.
I think there's not many tickets left, so people need to book it, because it was a bit difficult to book it for me. It's great. So this I don't know about your work, because I've seen a few pieces. I've seen It Needs Horses, I've seen Paradise Lost, I've seen Up Down the Escalator. how would be different Juliet and Romeo if I go on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday? Would be any different? Would be exactly the same piece to the dot?
I think probably it would feel similar. I mean, I'm interested in that experience inside, which can feel so varied, and outside can seem not very varied at all. So, yeah, I think it's similar if you saw it each night. Yeah.
What's next for you? You told me that you've been just in Kiev. You're going to be at the place in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Tell me what's your life looking at the moment?
Yes. So we're doing Juliet and Romeo as the British Council the last week of the Fringe Festival. We have some dates in the autumn. We have dates in spring next year for Juliet and Romeo. I'm going to try and step out of the piece and give someone else the role. So someone else will perform with Solène, and that's the first time we've done that. So we're trying to, as a way of increasing our activity, I suppose, to have that piece touring and for me to be working on something else. And we're trying to get some R&D time in for a new piece kind of later to start working on it later this year. And that's I don't know so much about that at the moment, but again, I've decided not to be in this next one, which means that this conversation is interesting because when I'm outside, I have to try and articulate things which I don't articulate when I'm doing it myself. So yes, processes, exercises, whatever that thing is. Trying to kind of keep the connection to why I want to do it, if you know what I mean. So when I'm inside the work, like Paradise Lost, it was about the experience of being a parent, and Juliet and Romeo was about my experience of being in a long-term relationship. Not that the piece is about my relationship with Pippa, but it's about something of what that experience is. So I can feel a very clear personal connection to it. So this next piece is, how do I hold on to that while I'm not in it, and I'm trying to get others to be part of that and to bring their own connection to it.
Have you chosen that performer? Are you creating a clone of Bendy?
No, I haven't. No. We're kind of it's been a frustrating process of finding some people who I think are fantastic and can do it, but I mean, I think they could do it, but the dates are very difficult to fit in with their schedule. So of course, people who are talented are also often busy, and the freelance jigsaw that we all deal with is sometimes not aligning. So we're in the middle of that, trying to kind of make that work somehow.
Can you put your advert for the role in this podcast with a bullet point? Like, I need a performer who.
I could try and do that. I realize that maybe I'm not the right person to recast it. Maybe I need someone else to kind of to look at it and go, what is that? Because I'm involved in my own connection to it, and sometimes that feels difficult. I think that there's movement in it. It doesn't feel like that is. I mean, it's weird because it feels like there's acting in it, but I think the movement is beyond what most actors would do. So there's certain things in there which are like, I like the kind of extremity of some of the movement, and there's some duet stuff in which is improvised, but it's based on contact work and that kind of thing. She's like, so it's great if they can do that. I need to believe them as well. So that's, like we were talking about earlier, some kind of thing. And I need them to be funny as well. So that's also another thing. And of course, I've made a piece. You know, I've done things that I can do. So we were talking about, you know, getting kind of better at being yourself, and I have tried to let go of the things I'm not so good at. So of course, if I made that piece with a different performer from the beginning, it would be a very different piece. So the replacing is, you know, it's difficult. But yeah, I'm sure they're there somewhere.
The next question is a tiny bit political. We were talking about the British Council showcase for the Edinburgh Festival. We've been talking about the Place Prize. We've been talking about the National Critic Awards. We've been talking about the Olivier. And now that I'm working a tiny bit more in Europe, those kind of things sounds like coming from Mars to the people in Europe. And I don't know if it's your experience, but for me it feels like there's a big barrier between the UK and what's happening in Europe.
Yeah.
Is that your experience? And if so, why do you think is that?
We have done some touring in Europe, but not loads. And I'm not sure. Yes, I agree. There feels like there's a kind of fluidity in mainland European scene between festivals and promoters and countries that we are somehow not kind of part of. And I don't know why that is. I mean, I feel like there's often a slight inferiority complex. I certainly felt that when I was at the place, this kind of feeling that we all wished we were Belgian and all, you know, were wanting to live in Ghent and be part of this thing. And we were a bit like, oh, we're not quite there. And so maybe it's to do with that. It's like kind of inferiority thing, or feeling like we don't quite belong to that tradition, the visual theatre or the dance theatre of Pina Bausch, or, you know, we're somehow not quite part of that. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's some really great work that comes from the UK, and I think that the situation with funding and with how we rehearse stuff is quite different. And I feel like sometimes that means the work is often a bit sketched, you know. Sometimes it feels like this great, but it somehow hasn't had the time or the deepening that it needs. I would like to do more of that. I would like to be more connected to that kind of scene, and hopefully that's happening a bit for us now. But yeah, you know, I work a lot with English, with language, and sometimes there's that kind of sense that when we were in Paris with the Romeo show, there's this kind of sense of, oh, there's an English humour here. And that's okay, but I feel like sometimes that's also used a little bit like it's quirky, or, you know, these kind of words which keep us a little bit outside. It's something there, and it's almost like it's not quite taken seriously. I can think of lots of reasons why that is. I think again, you know, you look at, I don't even want to talk about it in this context, of course, but you look at Brexit and this idea of how we position ourselves as a country, and we try and keep ourselves a bit separate, and we want to be connected to the States, but we also want our relationship with Europe. And if you think about that, that's exactly how it feels in the dance world. You know, we have this kind of connection to Martha Graham and Merce Cunningham and this thing that's looking there, and then we've also got this desire to be part of what I think of as a more kind of visual theatrical tradition. And again, for me, I was like, yeah, you know, I'm a white English man, and I need to be okay with that as well, because otherwise I'm constantly going to be, trying to be something that I'm not, or wanting to be something that I'm not. So it feels like, I don't know, when I feel optimistic, I feel like if we could ignore Brexit for a moment, that there's a kind of maturing somehow of UK dance work, and hopefully that means there'll be more. Well, I would have said that before, but now there's lots of reasons to feel less optimistic about it. But yeah.
Yeah, for those who are listening to us or watching this and are not familiar with the British scene, I think you're very, very right, and I have to defend that very often right now in Europe sometimes, because there is, in my experience, there is kind of like, there is that quirkiness or that old school or something like that. And while here in the UK in the last 10 years are incredible things happening, like Ben Duke, and it's things that hopefully little by little are creeping into Europe, because so people from the mainland Europe research what's happening here, and I hope this podcast makes a little bit the bridge. Last time I was talking to some people. I was interviewing Guy Nader and Maria Campos, who are an amazing couple. They're doing incredible work. They're going all around Europe, and here in the UK they're not very well known, unless you've taken one of those workshops in Berlin or in Barcelona. So I think we need to start making those bridges, because us as artists, and this is my idea, we need to go beyond those regulations and those politics agendas that are just trends. 20 years ago it was trendy to be European in the UK. Now it's trendy not to be European. So yeah, that's a call for action for artists from here. It needs to be happening. 3 more questions. I was going to ask 2, but I have 3 more questions, and this is questions that I ask all our guests, and so you can answer as deep as you want or as quick as you want. So the first question is, how the hell do you manage your schedule and your energy?
Yeah, sometimes not well at all. So at the moment there's this kind of restructuring, I suppose, of the company, and what are the things that I do well, and what are the things that are just a kind of a waste of energy or kind of thing. So I suppose the main thing at the moment is me trying to not say yes to everything, which is a habit I think lots of kind of freelance people acquire. You finish your training and there's a hunger for work and a need for work, and there's a kind of mindset which is like, I just say yes to things, and then when you're being asked to do more things, you have to adjust. So you start saying no to things, and what are the criteria for saying yes and no, and there's a kind of strategic conversation about how do you keep a profile, or how do you make your activity look coherent from a kind of funding point of view, or from an arts council point of view. And then there's the artistic interest question, and they're not often, sometimes they can overlap, but they can often be quite different conversations. So I think at the moment it's me trying to say no, the default be no rather than the default be yes, and then to try and really consider what that thing is and how that impacts on this, but also on my family life and my time here, or my time traveling. I think like everyone else, I'm just juggling the whole thing, and sometimes it feels like the balance is wrong, and sometimes it feels like you've got it right, and then that's a short moment, and then it goes wrong. It's like that.
And that's something quite consistent with the people that I've been talking, that one of the secrets of managing your time, your energy, is to be able to say no.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly difficult.
It's really hard.
But it was fantastic to hear you those 2 tips, very, very clear. One is strategic for funding and how I manage that. It seems that and in reality my activity is consistent. And then the other one is how artistically interested I am into it. For young performers who are listening to us very often, what would you have to say? What would be your advice, like, or how you would include in the equation the financial instability, the financial need of having to say yes to everything that comes to your way?
Yeah.
How do you factor that?
I don't know, but yeah, I think we know what we want to say yes to. So if I think about myself when I was kind of finishing college, I think I knew the things that I was interested in, and I feel like if I'd been better at saying yes to those things, that would have helped me define who I was and define the kind of performer I was and the kind of work I wanted to do. And that would have involved saying no to certain things, but actually trusting that almost the faster we get, we don't arrive somewhere, but the quicker we're kind of, defining ourselves, then the easier it is for the world to kind of understand who we are, and not necessarily pigeonhole who we are, but to kind of understand that, and maybe then the route to kind of hopefully financially fruitful and artistically fruitful work is clearer or faster, maybe.
But it's really difficult. It's very tricky to be able to say no. But I fully agree with you that the sooner you learn that, and being clear with your criteria, and knowing to listen, because as you said, we all know, but it's difficult to make that
voice,
that decision. And in the program, something very, very important that I was not expecting that to happen, but at some point we talk about commitment, no? This idea of, if you don't perform, no one else can perform for you. But through that, and how you must commit to your performance, because otherwise it's not happen. How important is to commit to not commit? And it's like, well, I was committing to run today for 1 kilometer, but I wake up and I'm not good. I feel tired. Okay, I'm committing now to not commit to my run, and how important that is. And so it's great to hear that you feel that it's also faster, because it's something consistent that I hear with age. And it's very difficult to grab when you are
but it's that thing that we say it a lot to people, often students, the idea of auditioning, like you are auditioning them, they are auditioning, and that, again, it's a hard thing to do, because you want the job, but actually whether this environment, this way of working suits you, and if it doesn't, it's going to be very hard for you to be to bring of yourself, to give of yourself to that process. So then everyone ends up feeling a bit dissatisfied, whereas you're in something that you love and believe in, then it's your kind of creativity is going to be engaged in a very different way.
Definitely. If it's something that you love, it's something that you make everyone's lives better, and the process benefits, and you grow as an artist, as a person. And I was reading an article that you wrote for The Guardian a couple of years ago. I loved it. And it's fantastic, because a couple of times while your creation with of goat.
Oh, right, yeah.
And it was kind of like your little journal going into the rehearsal. It's really good. If someone hasn't read it, it's The Guardian. I think it was June, July 2017.
I can't remember.
Something I will post the link in the description. But then it was fantastic, because a couple of times you wrote, if this would be an ideal world, I would, or it would happen. If this would be an ideal situation, but it's not. Let me ask you very quickly, what is your idea of an ideal world? And more importantly, how the people that are working with you can make the situation a tiny bit more ideal, and how you, as Ben Duke, make the situation with the people that you're working with a tiny bit more of an ideal world.
That's good. The ideal world often involves more time. So I think the ideal scenario for me would be able to work down here. I love working kind of in this place and feeling far away from the rest of the world. So I suppose in that ideal world, all of the performers would need to have their kind of private lives in a state of suspended animation, so that they could afford the time to kind of come and be down here. And that would be a process of, that would be, I don't know, I think maybe a period of 2 months or something of investigation and work. Then I would like a break, I don't know, space and time, and then to come back for another month and start putting it together. And then in the ideal world, there would then be a premiere that was important enough to make me finish the piece, but not full of reviewers or people who were gonna judge it too much. So it would exist in a kind of, I don't know where that would be, some kind of place where it's important. There's a bit of fear, so I've got to finish it, but then we've got another 2 weeks of performance before anyone, any of the gatekeepers kind of see it. So I think the ideal world would be something like that, and all of the. Oh yeah, no, there would be in the ideal world there'd also be a 2-week kind of tech in a wonderful theatrical space with all of your kind of collaborators around you.
Catering provided.
Yes,
Catering
yeah,
provided.
absolutely, yeah, and lots of time to kind of 2-hour lunch breaks to eat together, and yeah, something like that. And also in an ideal world, that would be it would be a company. Yeah, so people who the kind of depth of relationship and the amount of time you'd work together meant that you were moving on somehow. You weren't kind of you were moving on together. So yeah, there we are. So the ideal world would be something like that. But I also know that I always crave more time, and sometimes more time doesn't make the work better. It doesn't help me.
Agreed. And I'm going to tell you one is right now it happened, one of the most amazing moments of this conversation, which I think one of the moments that I'm going to treasure for the rest of my life is I saw Ben Duke disappearing before my eyes to go into that ideal world as you disappear into Paradise Lost. It was fantastic to see that smile and that disappearing into that, and seeing you enjoy that ideal world. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to ask you the last question before I hand it over, which is very, very simple. Do you have any resource, book, film, documentary, music that has changed your life? Something that you recommend very often, something that it comes to mind as like that was, or a few of them.
The ones that I find myself talking about quite a lot are they were books that we were given, I think, when we went to drama school. So they were the usual kind of list of books, and they're probably on the shelf somewhere. True and False, which is David Mamet's short book about acting, which I remember reading, and it had a profound kind of effect on me because he is saying you can lay you, like where you are and how you are feeling, on top of the character stuff that you're doing, or actually the two can coexist. So this thing of like the backstory, the more Stanislavskian or the more kind of method-like thing of staying in this thing. He was kind of saying you don't actually need to do that. You can say the lines, you can do the role, but you can also stay connected to where you are in that moment. And for me, that was a kind of revelation, because that was my experience of watching theatre and being on stage. Was like, what I love about it is that you can't suspend your disbelief. Like we talk about suspending disbelief, and you can up to a point. But what's delightful about it is that it exists alongside the reality of it. So I love it when you see people make mistakes. I love it when bits of scenery fall over. I love it when all of this stuff happens. And yet the show carries on, which takes me into the next thing, which is the Tim Etchell's book, Fragments. So Tim Etchell's from Forced Entertainment. And I love that book for a similar reason, that he talks about this thing of like Forced Entertainment being like a group of really crap magicians. He's like, we roll up our sleeves, we don't have anything there, the set is crap, the acting's a bit crap, the costumes are crap, everything's just not good. But in spite of all of that, in so many Forced Entertainment shows, I am transported by them and by what they do, and that sits alongside who they are in that moment. Well, the other one I suppose would be the Peter Brook Empty Space one, again, just because of the simplicity of that idea of theatre is just, you just need one person to agree to be a performer and the other person to agree to be an audience, and then you're off. And that's I love that as a starting point.
The power of the poor theatre, right? I can see
exactly.
as well. And no matter how much Hollywood can pour millions into, that cannot be replaced by a man describing a dance that he would never do because
Yeah,
it keeps falling apart.
Yeah, it's something to feel optimistic about, because as you say, we're saturated with so much media and stuff on screens, but actually it can't do this thing. It can't replace it, and that is the reason to be joyful, because it means that there's still a reason to do this, to do this thing.
I'm gonna hand it over to see if we have someone online.
Okay.
Elena, who is here, do you wanna jump in and pass you this?
Hello.
Hello.
And I had questions that were actually quite similar to Jorge, and it's interesting. But I wanted to maybe ask, because I also did literature, I also did some theatre, and then I also ended up dancing. And I'm really curious about that trajectory and why dance was the thing that felt like the one better to hold you.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I felt that when I went to the place that there was, I felt kind of out of my depth, and like I couldn't do so much of this stuff, but I also felt a sense of arrival, and like this is a tribe of people that I feel very connected to. So I think it was almost like that emotional, a sense of home or belonging or something, which I hadn't really experienced in those other environments. I mean, I loved the drama training, but I was like, I don't quite fit in this world. And then the experience of arriving at the place and feeling like this is yeah. So I think it was to do with that meant that it kind of had a hold on me, even though it was the one that I found so much harder than literature or the acting stuff. I was like, wow, this is really but maybe I also liked that about it. It had something concrete about it as well.
And it was similar, like what Jorge asked about the imposter syndrome, like if you felt that imposter syndrome within dance, and then how did you negotiate with that feeling, or how did you deal with it?
I suppose I struggled with it, and initially thought I could, because I didn't really know I didn't really know any dancers. I didn't know the kind of length of time that most people trained in dance. I thought, I can get to this place. I can spend 2 years or 3 years and on. And it took me a long time to realize that wasn't the case, and that it was going to be a much longer process. So I think there was a kind of a letting go of that idea, and almost trying to embrace the outside, the feeling of being an outsider. And maybe that's slightly different from being an imposter. It's like, okay, if I try to be this kind of dancer, I feel like an imposter. But if I position myself as an outsider who can't do that, but who can maybe comment on that, or who can maybe use that in a different way, then that felt like a more positive place to be, and less damaging. Exactly.
After many years working within dance, how do you keep yourself nurtured and inspired in this field?
And for me, books is a big part of that, and watching theatre is a big part of that. I feel like I still want to just keep watching stuff, because every now and then there's a show which just kind of lands with me, and I'm not sure if I then spend the next few years trying to imitate it, or if I spend the next few years trying to understand why it was so good. Or so I feel like that's I have to keep trying to see things.
And one question which I didn't expect to ask as well, but you named your company Lost Dog, and I was wondering what was the inspiration for you?
Lost Dog was it was to do with trying to think of things that were about mixtures, and I like the idea of a mongrel, like as a dog that wasn't a crossbreed, but that was made up of many, many different things and had slightly lost the sense of heritage, but was its own thing. So that was the word that when Raquel and I were talking about it was kind of mongrel. But mongrel has negative connotations in English, and so that took us to lost dog. And also I think I was reading this book called Disgrace, which is J.M. Coetzee.
I've read it.
Yeah, have you read that?
He's from South Africa.
Yeah, he's South Africa. Yeah, amazing.
I've met him actually.
Have you?
Yeah.
Wow. I think, he's an amazing writer. That book, I think, is extraordinary. On the front of that book, there's a very, the edition that I had is a very thin, stray dog. And it was somehow such a great cover. And when I read the book, became an even better kind of cover. So there's something about that as well that was in my head, I think, at the time when we were trying to come up with a name for the company. So.
Okay. Cool. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Last couple of questions from Bridget. So she said,
Hi Ben, I hope you're well. I've got 4 questions. First one, what are your thoughts on using improvisation as a tool in performance? 2, how do you manage the multitasking of generating text and movement at the same time, both in the creation process and in the performance? Number 3, what does authenticity mean to you? And number 4, which is kind of related to the previous question, how can a story be told authentically? Thanks. Bye.
Wow. Okay. Those are some big questions, no?
it is.
Improvisation. Using it to generate material feels, just endlessly fascinating and useful. And I realized that I'm quite... I have a strange relationship with improvisation because I realize that I'm not quite. Maybe I'm too controlling. So sometimes that thing of when I've worked with Rick Nadine or Seke, and there's that kind of embracing of, if you're really going to go into improvisation, you have to be open to this thing taking its own journey and going wherever. And I'm like, I like that, but I also want to keep the shape. I also want to control the outcome of this thing. So it feels like in performance, I'm offering little moments of improvisation, but it's almost like they sit within a scene which has a beginning and an end. And we, like in Juliet and Romeo, we both know how this scene kind of ends. So we know that if we're going to say a different line or we're going to do something else, we have to get back to a certain point. So it feels like there's pockets of freedom within it. But I think the thing is always looking at it and going, is this better if I set it? Like if I set it, what do I gain and what do I lose? And trying to work out, what's so for movement, it's like, is this going to be any better if I set it, or is an improvised score going to keep a kind of freshness that means it stays? It's better. I suppose that's the only way I can judge really whether. And with text, I think that all of the text that we make for the text I made for Paradise Lost, the text for Juliet and Romeo, is all done on our feet. So it's not like we're sitting and writing; we're standing and improvising. Mm-hmm. And as you repeat the improvisation, you notice which bits of text you remember and which bits kind of stay. And so that process then carries on into the being on stage, where some of those scenes are loose, and then in the process of performing they become tighter, but somehow you hold on to the feeling of improvisation. So you hold on to that sense of, I'm not repeating lines that I have learned, I am improvising, but the improvisation happens to be the same each time, which obviously defeats the point of improvisation. But so it feels like there's something of the spirit of it or the feeling of it which is important for me as a performer to hold on to, so that I can believe that I am making this up.
Keeping it fresh.
Yeah.
And making it for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. The juggling of things. I suppose it doesn't feel like juggling. I think that the hardest thing about it is the kind of body, like how, if you warm up at the beginning of the day, how do you keep that availability in the body if you then spend 2 hours sitting there and talking about something? So that feels, that part of it feels difficult. Like, how do you keep those things available throughout the day? But the actual juggling of stuff doesn't feel, for me, it doesn't feel that hard. It feels like the question is always the same. Like, is this better if we just say it, or is this the bit where we feel like moving? So it can be a kind of, not so much a juggling, but almost like a kind of a collage feeling of like, okay, let's do this now. I feel bored by my voice, so let's try moving. Or I feel physically tired, so let's try talking. It feels like it's experiential. So the choices are like, how do we feel inside it? And that can be the day, or obviously on stage, we've made those choices already, but you can still be that thing of, I shift the medium, I shift the mode of expression, but it's all still part of telling this story. The idea of authenticity, I don't know. It's a tricky word, because it's kind of this idea of authenticity and honesty and some kind of believability of performers. My understanding of it is that if you are able to connect to something that is real for you, then we believe it as audience. And that sounds very simplistic, but I found in Paradise Lost that I needed moments that took me right back to a particular memory, and I needed to create space and time on stage to connect to that memory. And if I could do that, then that would offer me a kind of fuel for the next bit. And I think Juliet and Romeo is similar. Like, if there's moments where it feels like a dropping somehow. It feels like a dropping in to myself, and that gives me a feeling of authenticity, I suppose. So if I'm working with other people, there's some process around that of how do we find that connection, and making sure we take the time to make that connection. So that can be, just don't rush through it, but find the time on stage to do that. So does that answer the last bit of that question? It was about authenticity. How do you tell a story? Yeah. So I think that the answer for me at the moment about telling a story authentically, it doesn't mean it has to be your story. Like, it doesn't mean it has to be your autobiography. But within that story, where are the kind of islands, or where are the moments where you feel yourself connecting to that memory? Because I think there's that thing about reliving and repeating, which they're very different things, aren't they? So how do you relive? And I think you relive by getting into that memory.
Segner normally talks about presentation and representation.
Right.
It's presenting something for the first time, because it cannot be repeated. It's happening now, even if you're repeating the same line, or trying to represent something that already happened in the past,
right.
which is very
I think
very accurate.
That seems true, and we see a lot of, I think dance particularly can be quite guilty of representing, because the rehearsal has happened, the decisions have happened, and a lot of dance rehearsal is about how you can get rid of the mistakes. And so you're watching something that's kind of done already, which can be not so great.
is what are the techniques to keep that magic, and even something is hyper rehearsed, how it can be presented for the first time, because it's never going to happen again.
No,
it's happening in that moment.
Yeah,
that's a little bit what we're trying in this program as well.
Yeah.
Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now I can understand why people like you a lot, because it's very, very generous, not only in your performances, but talking and with your answers. I love having a little bit like a window into your brain that I could carry on, continue talking with you forever, because I have notes. I feel like I want to talk about autobiographical work, how do you recover from up and lows, and how I have lots of questions, but I think it's a good moment to say thank you again for receiving me in your home, for having this conversation, being so open. Thank you for disappearing into that imaginary world. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really hope that it will be another one in the future, because it's been fantastic, and I have lots of more questions for you.
That's great. It's been really fascinating stuff.
I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.